International Red Cross receives 3 Israeli detainees from Hamas in Gaza's El Nusrat camp. Hamas announces readiness to move to second phase of Gaza ceasefire and implement comprehensive detainee exchange. And the Egyptian parliament speaker condemns plans to displace Palestinians from Gaza, calling them an attack on the Palestinian cause. Hello there, good afternoon everyone. It's 4 o'clock, Cairo local time, and you're watching Q News. We begin today's bulletin with the latest from Gaza. Hamas has handed over 2 Israeli detainees to International Red Cross officials in Rafah, southern Gaza, as part of the 7th batch in the first phase of the ceasefire agreement. This phase involves the release of 6 detainees. In exchange, 602 Palestinian detainees, including 50 serving life sentences, 60 with long sentences, and 445 from Gaza arrested after October the 7th. 2023 are said to be released from Israeli prisons. The International Red Cross has received 3 additional Israeli detainees from Hamas at the El Nusrat refugee camp in central Gaza, following the earlier release of 2 others in Rafah. This release is part of the 7th batch of detainees in the first phase of the ceasefire agreement 2, which involves the release of 6 detainees. Among those freed were Elia Cohen, Omar Shem Tov, and Omar Vankvert. Additionally, a detainee named Hisham El Sayed from Gaza was also released without ceremony. Hamas has announced its readiness to move forward with the second phase of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, which includes a comprehensive detainee exchange aimed at achieving a permanent ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of Israeli military forces. In a statement, Hamas warned against any Israeli attempts to renege on the ceasefire and emphasized that the only way to secure the return of all detainees from Gaza is through negotiation and strict adherence to the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Now we're going to go live to Offa prison in the West Bank, where Israel is expected to release Palestinian detainees as part of the detainee exchange deal. Let's see that now. So as you can see on the screen, live pictures from Offa Prison this afternoon. A set of pictures that we've been used to seeing over the weeks with the different releases of Palestinian detainees. These preparations are underway at Offa Prison, located near Ramallah, for the anticipated release of Palestinian detainees. Israel is said to release 602 Palestinian detainees today. This is, of course, part of the 7th batch of exchange under the having spent over 20 years in Israeli jails. According to the Palestinian Prisoners Media Office, the 602 prisoners will be freed in a significant step toward fulfilling the terms of the ceasefire agreement. These are the pictures that we are seeing here on our screens right now, and we'll be keeping you up to date as we go through the afternoon and indeed into the evening as we see those prisoners being released from Offa Prison. Once again, preparations are underway at Offa Prison, located near Ramallah, for the anticipated release of Palestinian detainees. Israel is said to release 602 Palestinian detainees today. This is part of the 7th batch in the exchange under the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. The release includes a number of detainees who have been sentenced to life imprisonment, with some of these people having spent over 20 years in Israeli jails. According to the Palestinian Prisoners Media Office, the 602 prisoners will be freed in a significant step toward fulfilling the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Those are the words of the Prisoners Media Office. So there we go, live pictures from Offa Prison, as we're going to see as the day goes on, more and more activity as those detainees, those prisoners of Israel are released. Some more pictures now, as we can see the Israeli released detainees are being transferred to a hospital in the Petah Tikva area in the central district of Israel. Let's take a look at those pictures now. So multiple breaking news stories this afternoon that we'll be watching for you here at Qnews as we go through the day off the prison, and of course those Israeli detainees we just saw there being transferred to hospital. Now, the Israeli army has confirmed the body handed over by Hamas to Israel through the International Committee of the Red Cross on Friday belongs to Shiri Baibas. This follows a mix-up earlier in the week when an incorrect body was delivered to Israel, which Tel Aviv stated was that of a Palestinian citizen. The clarification marks a resolution to this dispute over the identity of the remains. And now for more on all these topics that we're covering this afternoon, we go across to Salma Marwan, who's in the newsroom. Salma.
Thank you, Mark. And for further analysis, we're now joined from Cairo by Al Ahram Weekly Managing Editor, Khalid Dawood. Mr. Khalid, we're glad to have you with us as usual. So the release of the detainees is a critical part of the peace process. If you can expand on the role Arab mediators such as Egypt and Qatar play in ensuring successful exchanges and the durability of the ceasefire agreement.
Well, thanks, Salma, for having me. Indeed, we're approaching near the end of the first phase of this shaky ceasefire agreement. Next week is supposed to witness the release of the last group of bodies, Israelis who were held by Hamas. And then the more critical part is supposed to start. Actually, it was supposed to start more than 3 weeks ago in terms of negotiations over the second phase of the ceasefire deal, which is due to witness the full withdrawal of the Israeli troops and the end of the war. Of course, the Arab mediators, namely Egypt and Qatar, played a very important role throughout the past few weeks whenever there was a problem or whenever there was a dispute over the implementation of parts of the agreement. That happened several times, including the latest incident concerning the body of the Israeli woman who was held by Hamas and was mistaken for another body that was delivered to the Israeli side. So whenever there was a bottleneck, whenever there was a serious dispute in terms of interpreting the agreement, that's where the role of Egypt and Qatar came in to settle those disputes and to ask both sides to abide by the agreement. Of course, the Israelis committed many violations, including the killing Palestinians in different parts of Gaza and also delaying the implementation of the humanitarian part of the pact in terms of the amounts of humanitarian aid that was allowed.
Yes, sir, sorry for cutting in, but I would like to build on what you said. With the near completion of the first phase of the ceasefire and detainee exchange agreement, what are the chances that the negotiations of the second phase of the agreement will succeed?
Well, to be honest, there are obviously certain extremist members of the Israeli government, perhaps including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, who want to go back to war, especially after the display of force that we've seen by Hamas in all the several exchanges that have happened since January 19, when the original ceasefire agreement went into effect. So again, there is certainly calls by people like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich calling for the immediate resumption of the war as soon as the first stage takes place. But again, most of the obstacles and the kind of twists come from the Israeli side, and indeed that's where probably the role of the American mediators, namely President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, are supposed to interfere to put pressure on Israel in order to respect the agreement that was signed and to start carrying out the second phase of the agreement. We've already heard statements from Hamas saying that they want to have one big deal, exchanging all the prisoners at once as soon as the second stage goes into implementation. But the problem so far is that Israel and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has delayed sending a delegation to either Cairo or to Doha in order to seriously start the second phase negotiation. And that's where, again, we will be very much in need for the U.S. role, the Egyptian role, the Qatari role, in order to bring the parties to start implementing the second part of the deal and to reach a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And of course, the main challenge will remain who will rule Gaza and the day after, considering Israel's stance and that of the United States, to be honest, that Hamas should not allow to govern Gaza. So the role of the mediators is not only concerning the implementation of the agreement, but also coming up with a concrete plan for the day after in Gaza and for the reconstruction in Gaza, while considering the proposal that was put forward by U.S. President Donald Trump about the transfer of Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt and Jordan, which was widely rejected by mainly Egypt and Jordan, but also all Arab countries. And thankfully enough, I think we've started seeing
yes, sir, but speaking of this point, Trump has tailored this statement. He said that it's a good plan, but he's not willing to enforce it. How do you interpret this wording?
Well, I think this is a very important development and a reflection of the very strong stand that was taken by the Arab countries, namely Egypt and Jordan in particular, because they were the two countries mentioned by President Trump as a destination for the Gaza residents. So I guess this wide rejection of his plan, and by the way, it was not only Arab countries that rejected this plan, but also European countries, and including inside the United States itself. We've seen a letter signed by 145 Democratic members of Congress asking President Trump to give up this bizarre plan to transfer the Palestinians, because it would amount to ethnic cleansing and something like, a violation of all the agreement that was signed in the U.S. Security Council resolution. I really, really hope that we're putting behind us this weird proposal put forward by President Trump, and that we can move forward towards implementing the agreement that was negotiated by Mr. Steve Witkoff, the personal envoy of President Trump. So that was an encouraging statement, but I hope that it becomes strengthened when the Arab countries that met recently in Riyadh and then later on the Arab Summit on March 4th, they provide another alternative solid plan for the reconstruction of Gaza without moving out any Palestinians. So I guess this is definitely good news that Mr. Trump said he will not force it, and that he was speaking about this plan.
Sir, sorry for cutting in, but I have to ask you, I have to ask your intake about an important point. So alongside the comprehensive exchange of detainees, the second phase also includes the complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza Strip. What are the chances of this point specifically happening?
Well, I'm sure that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his extremist coalition is going to seek to place as much obstacles as they can to prevent this from happening. And even when we look at the Lebanon model, for example, even though the agreement with Israel and Lebanon stated that Israel should fully withdraw from the southern Lebanon, they insisted to maintain some sort of military presence in 5 points at least. So I guess best case scenario is that the Israelis leave the vast majority of the Gaza Strip, but I'm sure they're going to look for excuses to maintain any sort of buffer zone between Gaza and the rest of the Palestinian territories. But again, Salma, let's not forget that even the negotiations over the release of the prisoners and the Israeli prisoners held by Hamas is not going to be an easy task, because that's the last group, and they include mostly Israeli soldiers, and I'm sure that Hamas is going to be asking for a heavy price in order to release those Israelis who still are held by Hamas. According to the American side, there are about 22 Israelis. 19 of them are Israeli soldiers and officers. So definitely, besides the issue of Israeli withdrawal, the exchange is going to be very difficult.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much from Cairo. That was Al Ahram Weekly Managing Editor Khalid Dawood. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews. And now we're going to move back to Mark in the studio.
Thank you, Selma. Selma Marwan there in our newsroom. Now, the Speaker of the Egyptian Parliament has condemned malicious plans aimed at displacing Palestinians from Gaza, emphasizing that they seek to eliminate the Palestinian cause. He highlighted Egypt's role in providing diplomatic protection to prevent such schemes. Also, Egypt is developing a comprehensive, multi-phase recovery and reconstruction plan for Gaza, ensuring Palestinians remain. He added that Egypt's approach stresses that regional and global stability depends on a final settlement, guaranteeing an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. The United Nations has expressed concern over the ongoing Israeli aggression in the cities of the West Bank, particularly in the north, for the second consecutive month. The spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, Stefan Dujarric, stated that the United Nations remains concerned about the continuous operations carried out by Israeli forces in the northern part of the West Bank, which are the longest since the early 2000s. The Palestinian Red Crescent announced the killing of a 13-year-old child by Israeli occupation forces gunfire in Al Khalil, south of the West Bank. The United Nations reports that the Israeli military campaign has resulted in the deaths of at least 51 Palestinians and the displacement of 40,000, while 3 Israeli soldiers were killed during the same period. Palestinian media reported that Israeli forces withdrew from the village of Yasid, north of Nablus, in the West Bank, after arresting a Palestinian man and his wife from a besieged house. The Israeli forces had deployed military reinforcements, accompanied by a bulldozer, towards the village, and explosions were heard in the village simultaneously with the siege of the house. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has visited the Tulkarm refugee camp in the West Bank, pledging to increase military operations following a series of bus explosions. The Israeli military announced that it would intensify operations in the West Bank and block entry points in certain areas, although it did not specify which locations. This move comes part of an ongoing large-scale military operation in the West Bank that has been underway for the past month. Well, that's almost all we have time for in our news bulletin this hour, but let's get a recap of the main headlines this afternoon. International Red Cross receives 3 Israeli detainees from Hamas in Gaza's al-Nusayrat camp. And the Egyptian Parliament Speaker condemns plans to displace Palestinians from Gaza, calling them an attack on the Palestinian cause. Well, that's all for our bulletin this hour. Don't forget you can follow us at Qnews EGY on social media, wherever you use a platform. And don't forget, we'll be continuing to cover the big stories this afternoon with those detainee exchanges. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on Qnews.